So this morning we'll continue with Tozan's 5 ranks, and we're going to appreciate the 5th rank of the HenSho Goi, which are the relative and the absolute. And the title is the absolute and the relative containing arriving, which sometimes is translated as mutual accomplishment or integration of the absolute and relative. And there's a lot of different translations of it, but that's the idea that the relative and the absolute are integrated, but they're integrated so that we go beyond the relative and the absolute. But that'll become clearer the more we get into the discussion. But the verse that I use is, who can be tuned to that beyond what is and what is not? Though all persons want to leave the ever-flowing stream, each is still sitting in darkness black as charcoal. So we'll unpack that a little bit. But so at this stage, one has arrived at the integration of the absolute and relative. And Master Hakuin only had a very short comment about this stage. And he said, in order to understand rank 5, you need to study the following verse. How many times has Takuan, the idle old gimlet, not come down from Mystic Peak? He hires foolish wise men to bring snow, and he and they together fill up the well. Okay, so there's another translation that says the lazy Takuan came down many times from the summit of Mystic Peak, engaging foolish men together filling the well with snow. So one of them says that how many times has he not come down? And the other one says he's come down many times. So what is Mystic Peak? First, we'll talk about that. And this Mystic Peak is mentioned in the Flower Garland Sutra. And the Japanese word for it is Myobucho. And so Takuan Zenji, this Zen master who's mentioned in the verse, he dwells on Mystic Peak. And this Mystic Peak is the highest peak of a mountain, and it represents the awakened mind. That absolute place where not a speck of anything lingers. Here there's no self, no other, not a trace of a person or an animal or an insect. This is the world of our Zazen, where there's no self, no speck of anything in heavens and earth. This is a state of mind where we lose track of our body, of the Zendo, of this very world. This Mystic Peak is the source of wisdom of Manjushri Bodhisattva, who's the Bodhisattva who's renowned for his wisdom. So in one rendition, it says Takuan never for 1 second left Mystic Peak. But for the sake of liberating all beings, he came down off the mountain of form called Myobucho, but every place he went, he was still in the state of mind of Mystic Peak. The state of being, of not having extraneous thoughts. And the ongoing continuation of clear mind moments was all there was. This is the meaning of he never having left the mountain. Whether eating, pooping, or bathing, he remained in that place of continuous clear mind moments. And in the midst of that awakened mind, he liberated others. Now, the mind of continuous clear mind moments is a satori of everyday life. If we leave the everyday world and remain on Mubucho, the mystic peak, we fall into the realm of nihilism. And we can't throw away our life in the actual world and abandon the liberation of all beings. If we think there's a separate world from the peak of Myobucho, we create a falsehood. And our everyday life must be the same as Takuun's stay on Mystic Peak. Never abandoning it. This is how it must be. So this image of filling up the well with snow, it's no matter how hard you try, you'll never fill the well with snow. So you dump the snow in and it melts in the water and flows away in the aquifers. So it's a reference to our Bodhisattva's vows, which are never ending. We don't take action because we expect a certain result. We do it because it needs to be done. We pick up the shovel, not because we're going to fill the well with snow, because shoveling is the Dharma activity of that moment. So as Bodhisattvas, we show up for the impossible. So again, the verse that Master Tozan wrote for this fifth rank, who can be tuned to that beyond what is and what is not? Though all men want to leave the ever-flowing stream, each is still sitting in darkness black as coal. And Aiken Roshi had a slightly different translation. He says, not falling into being or non-being, who can be in accord with this? So everyone longs to leave the eternal flux. So the translation of luck is everyone longs to leave the ever-flowing stream. And Aiken says, not just to live in harmony, but to return and sit by the charcoal fire, which is kind of cozy, but Lux is, each is still sitting in the darkness black as charcoal. So we'll look at each line now and see what it says. So who can be tuned to that beyond what is and what is not? So there's a verse that we sometimes chant here in the morning Zazen, affirming faith in heart, mind, and it says, what is not is, and what is not. I'm sure that when we chant it in the morning, there's a lot of virtual head scratching. What is not is, and what is not. So what is not? So when I was thinking about that, I was reminded of a story of a man who lived near a military base. And every morning they shot off a cannon at 6 a.m. And he was usually sleeping, and he got quite used to it. And so he would sleep right through the cannon shot, the sound of this loud cannon. And then one morning, the cannon jammed and they didn't shoot off the cannon at 6 a.m. precisely. He jumped up and he said, what was that? You know? So he's attuned to what is not. So when everything functions smoothly, we don't notice it. We don't notice how our heart functions or how our kidney functions unless it's under distress of some kind. And so this one treasure within, we don't notice how it functions unless we're attached to all kinds of judgments and opinions and ideas and projections. Then it becomes something other than the one treasure. It just becomes, our ideas of how things should be. So what is? We project on everything. Here's a story of a Zen master who could not be seen by some spirits who wanted to observe his deportment. And so they coerced a monk to drop some food on the floor of the kitchen. And when the master made his checking rounds, he saw the food on the ground, and he became upset at the lack of mindfulness of the monks. I mean, this was food that they could eat. And he went to scold the monks, and in the process of doing that, he became visible to the spirits momentarily. Then when he settled back down, he became invisible again. So this is a cycle of what is and what is not of everything. Look at our thoughts. While you're sitting in Zazen, you might notice the nature of your thoughts. I often say, don't worry about the contents of your thoughts, just notice the thoughts arise, they exist, and then they decay. So what is not suddenly is, and then what is not. It's like everything. So if we try to grab at it, it immediately changes. So even the Buddhas, let alone spirits, can't recognize him or tune into him. Because what is not, and what is not is. So later in this verse of affirming faith in heart-mind, it says, seek movement, and there's no movement. Seek rest, and no rest comes instead. When rest and no rest cease to be, then even oneness disappears. So whatever we try to grab onto, it immediately changes. And when we let go of everything, that's the state of being on Mystic Peak. In the last century, in the field of physics, there was a big debate about whether electrons and protons and neutrons and other elementary particles were particles or waves. Because sometimes they acted like particles and sometimes they acted like waves. And I once heard the brilliant Nobel physicist Richard Feynman say, they're neither waves nor particles, but they're something else. But at this point in our understanding, we don't know what that something else is. It's just a mystery, what it is. So who can go beyond what is and what is not? What is that when we go beyond that? It's neither a wave nor a particle. It's something else, but we don't know what that is. It's a mystery. And then the affirming faith in heart mind also says, awakening is to go beyond both emptiness as well as form. So we could say in this context, going beyond both the absolute and the relative. So what's beyond the absolute and the relative? What's beyond what is not and what is? So we cannot definitively say what it is. So I'm going to read another section of the affirming faith in mind and trust, the affirming faith in the heart mind. It says, when you assert that things are real, you miss their true reality. But to assert that things are void or empty also misses reality. The more you talk and think on this, the further from the truth you'll be. Cut off all useless thoughts and words, and there's nowhere you cannot go. Returning to the root itself, you'll find the meaning of all things. If you pursue appearances, you'll overlook the primal source. Awakening is to go beyond both emptiness as well as form. So again, it's saying the same thing. Who can be attuned to that beyond what is and what is not? Awakening is to go beyond both emptiness as well as form. So what is it then? It's neither absolute nor relative. It's something that we can never know. But cut off all useless thoughts and words, and there's nowhere you cannot go. Doesn't say cut off all thoughts and words, just useless thoughts and words. So what are useless thoughts and words? Yeah. Well, if you're going shopping and you're making a shopping list, I'd say that's pretty useful. Or if you have to drive to meet somebody at a place you've never been and you look it up on your GPS or on a map, I'd say that's pretty useful. But what's useless? I'll just make a stab at it. Anything that inflates your ego, for a start. It's pretty useless. Anything that aggrandizes yourself, anything that pities yourself. So, anyway, I'm sure you can think of all kinds of useless words and thoughts. So the second line is though everybody wants to leave the ever-flowing stream. Everyone wants to leave the ever-flowing stream. So there can be two interpretations for this line. I mean, the obvious one might be that everyone wants to leave the realm of suffering. You know, the Dharma wheel, the ever-flowing stream. Another one can be, and my Zumi Roshi told me this, that everybody wants to accomplish themselves further. See? So wherever we are, just to further realize our intrinsic self, our Buddha nature, just deepen our understanding of it. Years ago, I read this novel by Hermann Hesse called Siddhartha, which is a fictionalized account of the life of the Buddha. And he becomes enlightened by listening to the voice of the river rather than leaving the ever-flowing stream. Siddhartha becomes one with the stream. And he uses the river as a really nice analogy for practice. So this Siddhartha watches the crystal movement of the water, and the voice within him is strong and loving. And he knows that the person who has grasped the secrets of the river must know many other things. And one of the secrets of the river is constancy. It's always running, but never runs out. Of course, you know, maybe that was true at a certain time, but right now, there are rivers that are running out because of overuse. But anyway, the analogy still might hold. And Siddhartha didn't understand the meaning at first, but he knew it was special. And he learns most from the river about how to listen with an open heart. And what the river taught Siddhartha is that the source occurs at the same moment as the end, and there's no separation. And he learns to see his own life this way, from his birth to his death as one whole. And now the voice comes to him in a single word. And Hesse uses the word Om, but we Zen Buddhists, we often use the word Mu. That one Mu covers everything. I remember Aiken Roshi once told me that when the phone would ring, he wouldn't answer it immediately. He would just listen to one more ring and he'd go moo with that ring, and then he would pick up the phone and he would be in that state of attentiveness, whoever was on the other line. But the historical Buddha, who was also named Shakyamuni Gautama, his quest was to leave the ever-flowing stream of suffering due to birth, sickness, old age, and death. He grew up in a palace with all the comforts that wealth could afford. Yet when he encountered suffering in the world, he felt compelled to begin an endless journey to understand its causes and cessations. So he practiced as an ascetic for 6 years and was not satisfied. He did not escape the ever-flowing stream of suffering. It's when he took nourishment and sat under the Bodhi tree for 7 days and 7 nights, and then on the morning of the 7th night, he saw the morning star, and he became the Buddha, the awakened one. And he realized the fulfillment of his quest. And when he started to teach, his first teachings were the Four Noble Truths. So these truths articulated the nature of suffering, the cause of suffering, and the means by which one can leave the ever-flowing stream of suffering. So these streams, they flow into rivers which disappear into the ocean and become the waves of the ocean. Laozi, who lived in the 6th century before the Christian era, he was the founder of Taoism and the author of the Tao Te Ching. And he is said to have written this poem called "We Are a River." Said, "Our life has not been an ascent up one side of a mountain and down the other. We do not reach a peak only to decline and die. We have been as drops of water born in the ocean and sprinkled on the earth in a gentle rain. We become a spring and then a stream and finally a river flowing deeper and stronger, nourishing all it touches as it nears its home once again. Don't accept the modern myths of aging. You are not declining, you're not fading away into uselessness. You are a sage, a river at its deepest and most nourishing." And then he says, "Sit by a riverbank sometime and watch attentively as the river tells you of your life." So the last line, each is still sitting in darkness, black as charcoal. So each is complete. When I'm sad, I'm sad. When I'm happy, I'm happy. What's the problem? The problem is I don't want to be sad and I want to be happy. So that's useless thoughts and words. So at the end of the verse of the Jeweled Mirror Samadhi, which Tozan articulated, it says, "Practicing unobserved, functioning secretly, like a fool, like an idiot. Just to continue in this way is called the host within the host." See, not making a big splash of yourself, just going about your business, taking care of things. People think you're a fool, that's okay. But just to continue in this way is called the host within the host. So in Zen parlance, the host can refer to the absolute and the guest to the relative. But here, host within the host represents being awakened and functioning completely from that awakened state. The host within the host represents an engagement with suchness that can be sustained long-term, right in the realm of sense awareness and the unavoidable conflicts of life, but still being unobstructed by attachments. So the state of suchness is described in the first line of the Jewel Mirror Samadhi. It begins, "The teaching of suchness is intimately transmitted by Buddhas and ancestors." In other words, that's the teaching that has maintained our lineage from the time of the Buddha 2,500 years ago through to the present, the teaching of suchness. Suchness sometimes means everything just as it is, to see everything as it is. See that, and seeing, the injustice and the suffering, that doesn't mean that we just stand by idly. But because of the host within the host, we do what we can to help however we can. Well, Master Tozan, who's the author of these 5 ranks, had a deep enlightenment experience upon seeing his own reflection in a stream. And he had a deep experience of suchness, and he composed this following verse. He said, "Don't seek from others, or you'll be far estranged from self. Now I go on alone. Everywhere I meet it. It now is me. I now am not it. One must understand in this way to merge with suchness." So it now is me. I now am not it. So again, what is and what is not. So Master Dogen in the Genjo Koan wrote a few lines that map to Tozan's verse, which says, "It now is me, I am, now am not it." So Dogen wrote, "To carry the self forward and realize the 10,000 dharmas is delusion, that the 10,000 dharmas advance and realize the self is enlightenment." So the 10,000 dharmas just means everything, all phenomena. So to carry the self forward and realize the 10,000 dharmas is delusion. To realize the 10,000 dharmas by carrying the self forward is the same as being attached to forms and looking for enlightenment in external forms. That's why Tozan said, "Thus I now am not it." I am not carrying myself forward to realize other things. So on the other side, the 10,000 dharmas advance and realize the self is enlightenment. So in that case, it now is me. The world advances, and I see that is what I am in everything. I'm not separate from anything, from a broken tile or an ant or the clouds over the mountains or the birds. So this poem of Layman Pong, who's a famous enlightened layman in the golden age of Zen in China, he wrote this verse that I'm sure all of you will be familiar with part of it. He says, "In my daily life, there is no other choice than those that happen to fall into my hands. Nothing I choose Nothing reject. Nowhere is there a do, nowhere a slip. I have no other emblems of my glory than the mountain and hills without a speck of dust. My magical power and spiritual exercise consist in carrying water and gathering firewood. So his verse is a perfect example of it now is me. Everything that comes to me is me without any separation or slip. So here's another example of it as me, carrying snow to the well. We talked about that. When we sit in the darkness, black as charcoal, we're manifesting suchness, which is carrying snow to the well, which is liberating all beings. So one final verse. Dragon waters bore into the cliffs and scrape away the rocks, but they do not ever hate their labor. When you see it from afar, you know how high the dragon's mouth is. Can the water in the valley ever stop and rest? When the water finally reaches the sea, it becomes the great waves. So what they're all saying is our practice is endless. So when this translation of Aiken says to return and sit by the charcoal fire as the last line, we can understand it that sitting by the charcoal fire is also not resting. So, like it says, when we try to rest, no rest comes. And when rest and no rest disappear, then are no more than even oneness disappears. So that's what he's pointing to here, to always live in that state of not being jerked here and there by attachments, but at the same time, not resting on our laurels, because, the water in the valley never stops and rests, and our practice is endless. So.